Peak Performance.
Or should we say shortcomings, the Japanese title. That was developed by Cave.
Cave, huh? I know them. They made some pretty intense shooters.
They did. But they dabbled in racing too, with Peak Performance.
Interesting. And it came out in 97, right?
Yep, for the original PlayStation. But the publisher,
Oh, there's a twist.
a little one, it depended on where you lived.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
North America, Atlas published it.
Atlas, okay. Makes sense.
But in Europe, JVC Music Europe.
Huh. That's kind of unexpected. Different publishers, different titles.
Definitely adds a layer of intrigue.
All right, so what did the critics think back then?
Well, Game Rankings gives it a 67%.
67%, so not a smash hit.
Not exactly a universal rave, but respectable.
Yeah, not bad for a PlayStation racer. Any standout reviews?
Oh, definitely. We've got Consoles Plus Air. They gave it an 80%.
Wow, 80%. They must really love something about it.
They did. And then, the usual suspects.
Like GameSpot and IGN.
GameSpot gave it a 6 out of 10.
6. Okay, a little more middling.
And IGN, a 7 out of 10.
So a bit of a mixed bag, it seems.
But there's this one review that really stood out to me.
Which one?
It was from Next Generation Magazine.
Okay, and what did they say?
They said Peak Performance had all these unique options.
Unique options, like what?
They even mentioned a create your own obstacle course feature.
Wait, a track editor? In a 97 game?
Yeah, that got my eye too.
That's like way ahead of its time.
Right. Super interesting to see that back then.
Okay, I'm already hooked. But before we get into track building...
You want to talk about the driving itself?
Yeah. What did the reviewers say about the actual gameplay?
One word. Speed.
Speed, so it was a fast game.
Oh yeah, like seriously fast.
Faster than other racers back then.
One reviewer even compared it to Wipeout.
Wipeout. Okay, now we're talking.
That sense of pure speed,
Yeah, I get it. But was it just about going fast?
Well, it also heavily emphasized power sliding.
Power sliding, so like drifting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from what I've read, the game nailed it.
Mechanics felt good?
Really satisfying, apparently.
Okay, so you had to master those drifts to win.
Seems like it.
Man, that sounds fun. But, hold on.
What?
Were the tracks just about sliding around corners?
Ah, good question. Actually, no.
There's more.
Some courses had multiple paths you could take.
Multiple paths, like different routes.
Yep. Especially in those city sections.
So you had to think strategically about your route.
It wasn't just memorizing one racing line.
Interesting. Adds another layer of depth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you want to talk cars.
Oh, yeah. What kind of cars were in Peak Performance?
Well, over 20 to choose from.
20. Not bad. What kind?
The usual mix of sports cars, of course.
Makes sense. What else?
But then some real weird ones.
Weird ones? Like, what are we talking
You
about?
could drive a bus.
A bus. Hold on. Seriously.
Yeah. And, get this, a motor scooter.
A motor scooter. That's gotta be hilarious.
Right. Hidden gems, for sure.
Okay, I'm sold.
Oh.
But were the cars, like, officially licensed?
Nope. All generic designs.
No real car brands.
Pretty common back then, actually.
Yeah, I guess so. The focus was on the gameplay.
Totally.
Okay, but we had to circle back to that track editor.
The create your own obstacle course thing.
Yeah. That blew my mind. How deep was it?
Surprisingly robust, actually.
Like, what could you do?
You basically built your own time trial courses.
Whoa, build your own courses.
Using checkpoints on the existing tracks.
So you could get creative with the layout.
Exactly. Different challenges, testing your skills.
That's insane. Like an early Trackmania almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, this game just keeps getting cooler.
Right. But, it wasn't all perfect.
Yeah. No game is. What were the downsides?
The collision detection was a common complaint.
Collision detection, like hitting other cars.
Yeah. Apparently you could only hit them from behind.
Only from behind. That's kind of limiting.
It kind of took away some of the strategic options.
Yeah, I can see that. What about crashes?
Oh, not really.
No big satisfying crashes.
Nope. The collision detection meant they weren't realistic.
That's a shame. But did it have at least...
Invisible walls.
You read my mind. Lots of them.
Oh, yeah. Classic invisible walls everywhere.
Touch one and you just bounce back.
Yep. Pretty standard for the time, though.
True. I guess those quirks made it a little easier.
Maybe for some players, yeah.
Okay, one last thing before we move on.
What's that?
You mentioned car customization earlier, right?
Yeah.
Was it just cosmetic, or could you actually...
Do you know the cars?
Yeah!
Oh, you could do both.
Seriously?
They had a whole tune-up shop in the game.
Cool. So you could tweak the performance stats?
Yep. And even change the color of the car.
So you could make it look and drive how you wanted?
It was all about personalization.
This game is sounding more and more intriguing.
It really was ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
All right, we've covered a ton, but there's still more. We're diving deeper into peak performance.
Deeper? You mean there's even more to uncover?
Yeah. We've talked about the speed, the drifting.
That track editor's right. That was a wild one.
Totally. But before we started this deep dive...
You hadn't really heard of this game.
Yeah, I hadn't. But now I'm kind of fascinated.
Right. It's a hidden gem, for sure.
It definitely seems like it. So what else makes peak performance stand out?
Well, aside from those features we discussed.
You mean like the overall feel, the inspiration?
Yeah, that kind of thing. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
The game was actually inspired by the Pikes Peak hill climb.
Pikes Peak? Wait, seriously?
Yeah, that crazy mountain race.
The one with all the hairpin turns and insane elevation?
That's the one. And peak performance, it really tried to capture that.
How so?
The tracks, they were designed to mimic the real Pikes Peak course.
No way. So you had the tight corners, the steep inclines.
All of it, even the mix of paved and dirt surfaces.
That's awesome. I can only imagine how challenging that must have been.
Especially with the focus on speed and drifting, right?
Yeah, that must have been a wild ride. Did they get the atmosphere right, too?
Apparently so. Players talked about feeling immersed in the scenery.
Really? Like you could practically smell the pine trees.
That's what some reviews said. And remember, this was 97.
Yeah, those early 3D graphics could be pretty rough.
It makes you appreciate the effort they put into the environments.
Totally. They wanted to make it feel authentic.
Absolutely. And, you know, we have to come back to the track editor.
The track editor, what about it?
You mentioned user-generated content, right?
Yeah, like how it was ahead of its time.
Well, I think that's a great point.
Most racing games back then didn't even attempt that.
It gave players so much creative control.
It's like they knew what was coming.
Like with games like Gran Turismo and Forza later on.
Exactly. All that sharing and community stuff.
It all started with ideas like that track editor.
It's too bad they didn't have the online infrastructure back then.
Imagine a whole community of peak performance track creators.
That would have been incredible. But even without sharing.
It still added a ton of replay value, right?
Yeah, no doubt. It shows how ambitious the developers were.
They really believed in player creativity and customization.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. Do you think peak performance influenced other racing games?
That's a tough one. Hard to say for sure.
You know, like, did those features inspire other developers?
It's possible. Maybe it planted some seeds, at least.
Maybe some developers saw it and thought, we can do that too.
Exactly. Even if it wasn't a direct influence.
It reflected a trend, right, toward giving players more control.
Yeah, a move away from just pure arcade action.
Like a shift towards more customization and creativity.
Definitely. It was a time of experimentation, for sure.
True. But we can't forget, peak performance had its flaws.
Oh, right. The collision detection and invisible walls.
Do you think those issues held it back?
Potentially, yeah. It definitely broke the immersion sometimes.
Yeah, for people who wanted a more realistic experience.
Exactly. But even with those flaws,
It still had those core strengths.
right, absolutely. The speed, the drifting, the track editor.
All pretty groundbreaking for the time.
It just shows you that even the most innovative games,
They're still products of their time, right?
limited by the technology available back then,
True, but it's still a testament to the game's strengths.
those flaws didn't completely ruin it.
It still sounds incredibly fun to play.
And intriguing too, right?
It's like a time capsule of gaming history.
A reminder that not every classic has to be perfect.
You know what? You've convinced me.
Convinced you of what?
I need to play this game. Peak performance, it's officially on my list.
Nice. I'm glad we could pique your interest.
But before I track down a copy,
We have one more question.
yeah, what's your final take on its legacy?
Its legacy. That's a big one.
How does peak performance fit into racing game history?
That's a question that deserves its own deep dive.